Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to talk about the penultimate round of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup, and it took place in Flamanville, France. Finally back on the podcast to talk about cyclocross racing is Tom. Tom, welcome back on the podcast.
Thank you, Noah. I look forward to being back with you.
And just like the rest of the season, Issam is here as well to talk with us.
Hey everybody.
The World Cup today in Flamanville was held in the backyard of Château de Flamanville. This castle was built in the 14th century before it broke down in one of the English-French wars. It was rebuilt in the 17th century using stones from the nearby cliffs. The chateau was notorious for having a lot of parties in that time. Today, no big parties with cyclocross fans, although there were some fans there, limited amount of 5,000, but there was a war. Not as bad as the French-English war, but there was a war to get into the first corner as first of the peloton, and Issam will tell us who managed to do that in the men's race.
Yeah, that was crucial. Obviously, everybody wanted to be in the front, but not. In the end, it was all going quite well. We were missing, obviously, a few guys at the start here. Lars van der Haar, one of the guys that was not able to start. But the guys that were there were obviously willing to show, the good legs before the World Championship closing in more and more. At the beginning of the race, we had the three guys of Pauw Sauze very strong in front with Iserbyt, Zweek and Van Toerenhout. Aerts and Van Kessel were also there, a bit the stronger guys. In the third lap, however, a crucial moment. Tactics have been played. Iserbyt goes away and Van Toerenhout holds up Aerts just that little bit. The gap grows and Aerts is not able to come back to Iserbyt. Iserbyt solos then to a victory. The battle for second a little bit more interesting though between Van Toerenhout and Aerts. In the end, a little bit of rain in the end of the race was making life just a little bit harder for the riders to get through the corners. Aerts changes to a thicker tire, a tire that is a little bit better through the mud, and eventually gets then that second place in front of Michael Van Toerenhout, who runs up the podium at the World Cup in Flamanville.
Not the most exciting race in terms of close combat on the men's side. Eli Iserbyt taking his first win since the World Cup in Besançon. He won both French races in the World Cup, so his previous win was on the 28th of November, so almost 2 months ago. He took his win here. What can we say about that win? Because it was a dominant performance by him.
Indeed, Iserbyt looked really strong today. He looks nice and comfortable, and he just rode away from the others after a couple of laps. And he settled down into a really nice rhythm and built up a gap of up to a minute by the end. So a really comfortable win for Iserbyt today, and I'm guessing he'll be hoping to replicate that next weekend and then obviously in the World Championships in 2 weeks' time.
I think today it was a perfect day for Iserbyt. He probably had good legs judging by how it went and how he spoke after the race. But looking at the parkour, this is perfect for him. Iserbyt is a small, compact guy. Today you had a lot of corners where it's simply just easier for him to navigate around than for, let's say, Toon Aerts or Michael Van Toerenhout. Of course, it also helps that Wout van Aert wasn't here, but you can only race the ones who are there, so there's no point in bashing Iserbyt for he only wins when Van Aert isn't there. I mean, it might be the case, but the same goes for all the other riders. You need to do it with the riders who are there. I think it's a shame Pidcock isn't here because now there's no reference. We can't really place this performance of Iserbyt somewhere. The weather today also benefited Iserbyt. He usually does well in these conditions, between 10-15 degrees, no leg warmers or arm warmers needed. It almost felt like a pre-season race with also a lot of Pauw Sauze riders at the front, but I think that it was mainly the parkour that helped him here today a lot because he was just so small and compact, and there were quite a lot of corners today, and I think that eventually gave him the benefit over Toon Aerts today.
Yeah, for sure I would agree with you on that one. I think it was the accelerations, many accelerations up the little steep banks and out of the corners, which really cost the bigger riders like Aerts. When you look at the lap times, Iserbyt was going around 7:40 throughout the race, and Aerts and Van Toerenhout were able to hold that pace, but then faded to around 8 minutes per lap in the last couple of laps. They just weren't able to keep with Iserbyt's 7:40 times, which saw them drop off behind Iserbyt by the end.
I think for Aerts as well, it was not really a parkour for him. Tall guy. In Hulst as well, it was not really his day, and we could see at the Hulst and Flamanville are a bit comparable in a way. Obviously, there was a little bit more room today, but still, the characteristics of the parkour were there. It was also a dry, fast race, and today it was a bit of the same. I think Iserbyt was, what initiated was a tactical a trick by Van Toerenhout to just be in front of Aerts at that crucial moment, making sure that there was enough of a gap. Aerts had to close that, but was just not really able to, blew himself up, and then, the race was ridden. And I don't think that Iserbyt really needed that. He was just a stronger guy today. He was really in his mood, and I don't think there was anybody today that was able to be even close to him today.
Yeah, I don't think Iserbyt needed that help of Van Toerenhout today. It's just overall a solid performance by Iserbyt. Aerts was also struggling a lot in terms of tire pressures and tire threads. Made quite some bike changes. Started on Grifo tires. The others opted to start on Reno, or we even saw a couple of small birds around. But most of the riders went from Reno to Grifo. We saw Iserbyt and Van Toerenhout make that change. Aerts went the other way around. He went to Reno, and after he made that move, he was looking a bit more comfortable, also opening the gap over Van Toerenhout in the end. But I think in the end today, despite it being a parkour that could favor close combat, I think everyone just came in the place where he belonged, because Van Toerenhout in third, also where I think he belonged based on today's performance, and same goes for him. Another solid performance by Michael Van Toerenhout.
Yeah, it was a really great performance again from Van Toerenhout. First time on the podium this year. It looked like he'd had a couple of results kind of outside the top 5 in Hulst and in the Belgian Championships last weekend. So I'm guessing he's going to be pleased with his performance today. And if he can keep on this upward trajectory, we could see him on the podium in World Championships, I think. Definitely an outsider for the title. I would not write him off yet. Pidcock and Iserbyt might be the favourites, but I think Van Toerenhout will put up a strong fight for sure.
Yeah, without going into too much details of World Championships preview, we'll be making a separate podcast for that. Without doing that, I think Van Toerenhout is not a pure world champion. He's not a winner. He's always up there, but not necessarily a winner. Does that mean it's impossible for him to become world champion? Absolutely not. We've seen a lot of riders be consistent and be podium riders, and then at the World Championships excel. And that can also happen for Van Toerenhout, but you will be facing opposition from riders who weren't here today. Quinten Hermans, Lars van der Haar, Tom Pidcock. So it would definitely be interesting to see. If we look at the entire top 10, we had that podium then of Iserbyt, Aerts and Van Toerenhout. Just outside the top 10, we find Laurens Zweig, who put in a decent ride, ahead of Kevin Kuhn. And then we find in 6th place Jens Adams from the Hollebeek Hoeve team. Ahead of Corné van Kessel, Toon van den Bos. 9th place went to Joshua Dubau and Timon Ruegg, and 10th. One name immediately in the top of the top 10 that stands out to me is Kevin Kuhn. Very, very strong race by him. He had a poor start, but then managed to ride all the way to 5th. Personally, I think that could have even been a 4th place without that bad start. But man, what a ride by the newly, well, not new Swiss champion, because he defended his title, but the newly crowned Swiss champion.
Yeah, that was a really good race from Kevin Kuhn indeed. Missed his start a little bit. Maybe also helped him, because then obviously you're going to have a little bit more room, a little bit more energy at the end of the race, and that helped him for sure. Zweig dropped a lot at the end of the race, and he was able to close in quite a lot, just not really able to overtake him, but nevertheless a really solid race. I think the one that stands out the most in the top 10, together with the guy that won this race, Eli Iserbyt.
Yeah, both riders definitely being strong today. And for Kuhn, I think today, I don't know if it's necessarily a parkour for Kuhn. I find Kuhn a hard rider to judge. I don't necessarily know what is a Kuhn parcours and what isn't. I feel like today was a bit of everything. It had a couple of longer straights where you could put down the power, some minor elevation and some corners. And Kuhn, probably because he is so hard to judge, it means he's all round. He can do a bit of everything. And I think today was a parkour where you needed a bit of everything, but overall courage to tackle these off-camber corners that there were. So overall a strong ride by him. And I think like if we look at the rest of the top 10 a bit further down, Dubau and Ruegg 9th and 10th. First, Ruegg, his countryman, 10th. I think also for Ruegg, who took his second World Cup top 10 here today, a very strong ride by him as well.
Yeah, indeed, it was a really strong performance from Ruegg as well, and I think it's great to see a bit more of an international top 10 again in the results. Obviously missing the Brit Pidcock, but yeah, Belgium, Dutch. We got the French Dubau in ninth. I remember Swiss as well is really good to see.
Ruegg, however, will not be participating in the World Championships at the end of the month. He has not been selected because it's impossible for him to travel to the United States as he isn't vaccinated, so do not look out for Ruegg at the World Championships. Unfortunate that he isn't vaccinated for a number of reasons, but if we just focus on the racing side, I think it's also a shame because he could have been an outsider for a top 10 position, and it's quite a while ago we saw a Swiss rider in the top 10, so that would have been cool. Now all hope for Switzerland to get a top 10 is on Kuhn, and it also belongs to the possibilities of Kuhn to get the top 10 as demonstrated by his 5th place today. Final name, we haven't mentioned him yet, Joshua Dubau, the newly crowned French champion, beating Venturini, and he ended 9th here. I think that Dubau also put in a good race, but for Dubau it was kind of the usual story, setting out fast and then fading quickly. It's just his trademark. He already did it in the under 23 category today, once again, setting out fast. Did he maybe get too excited when he was in that leading group after 2 laps?
I think so, you know. He was right up there at the start, like you said, and his home race in home country, the Frenchman, and yeah, 7:40 for his opening lap, and his penultimate lap was 8:20, and yeah, you really don't see this disparity between the lap times of the top guys. So yeah, I think a bit overexcited in the start, fading in the final, but I think there's certainly some potential there, and we could see the name cropping up again in the future top 10 positions.
Definitely possible. Dubau and Ruegg, both 26 years old. And Issam, do you think that it's maybe a bit of a trend that we haven't seen in the past 5 years, but it's back again? That for solid riders who are like good in France and Switzerland, that they are able to keep doing the sport with support, and that they are able to ride these high level races more often than what we've seen the past couple of 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I think that is becoming a thing. Yeah, and it's what definitely helps for them is that they probably they can focus on races that are also held in France and in Switzerland as well, and that obviously will help them get the money financially to be able to then start in these bigger races. The level in those races also have grown a little bit due to the fact that many Belgians go there as well. It's not the highest level, but it will obviously help, and I think that it is a tendency that we see now that those guys are also able, with the support of Belgian teams most of the time, but also some French teams, to be able to get to that higher level of cyclocross, and that's only good to see. That is something that should be cherished, and hopefully that is something that we're going to see in the future more and more.
Yeah, I hope that the situation internationally will keep improving. I know the UK scene is solidifying, and that same goes here for the local French series, although in Switzerland it's the opposite. The EKZ Cross series has disappeared. But if you look at it in the big picture, this year the position of the non-Dutch and Belgian World Cups is still significantly less important than the ones in Belgium and the Netherlands. The 5 in Belgium and 3 just over the border in the Netherlands are hardly skipped. The races outside are more and more skipped. I mean, USA and also the one in Besançon, those were alright. I would say 85-90% of the riders you would expect are there. But then if we look, Val di Sol had a massive skip, tiny fields. This weekend also, same story. But okay, I have to admit, this is historically a weekend that skipped a lot. And now there's also the factor of COVID, which meant that multiple teams that are, or countries that are sending teams to the World Championships don't send riders here because they don't want one infection to mean that the entire team has to stay home. So, of course, that also plays a role. But I still hope that this can somewhat be improved in the future, because I think that that could benefit these countries even more. Let's go and talk about the women's race then. We had a rapid start of Inge van der Heijden. She was the fastest into the field. No Brandt here today, no Vos, a couple of other big names like Alvarado and Vorst missing as well, and we were predicting a battle between Van Empel and Pieterse, and we got that. As said, it was Van der Heijden who had the fastest start, but Van Empel and Pieterse quickly moved to the front. In the first lap, Pieterse was still running the barriers, but in the second lap she hopped the barriers, put the rest under pressure because we had 5 leaders then. Pieterse, Van Empel, Persico, Van der Heijden and Vos. Pieterse, as said, jumped the barriers, put the rest under pressure, and opened the gap. She had a gap of 5 seconds over Van Empel and had that for about 1.5 to 2 laps. Then Pieterse thought, it's not really working, I'm going to sit up a bit, waited for Van Empel, they waited a bit, recovered slightly, and then we went towards the final 2 laps. It was Van Empel who was leading and she kept being in the lead. Van Empel put the pace high because she knew that Pieterse was going to jump the barriers and that if she was behind she would need to chase. Van Empel did that perfectly because going into the final lap she was still leading and she actually led going over the barriers. The big chance for Pieterse to do something looked to be gone. However, Pieterse did not leave it with that. She put in a stunning acceleration from behind to overtake Van Empel into first place. She then was putting Van Empel under pressure, but just before a corner she was caught napping by Van Empel. Van Empel moved back into the lead and then we came to the final bank and it was Van Empel who shot up the banking, but at the end Pieterse almost hit the back wheel of Van Empel, almost needed to unclip, but just about managed to stay on the bike. Then we went to the final downhill and Van Empel after that downhill actually sat up waiting for Pieterse, but Pieterse didn't wait. She fully sprinted towards the line, but on the latest of latest it was Van Empel who launched past Pieterse to take her second World Cup win of the season ahead of Pieterse. Behind that it was Capablanca Vos who ended third. I mean, what a race. I mean, Van Empel and Pieterse both just 20 years old. If this is the future of cyclocross, give me more because this was amazing.
It was a good race. I mean, way better than the men's race, that's for sure. And it was a close call till the end. And I only want more of this because this is definitely what we need for the women's cycling, women's cycling and cyclocross in general. This fuels it. This makes it it's a good promotion and definitely what we need. These two made it super close. It was a very tactical race, and up until the last corner we were not sure who was going to win it, and that is that's the magic that cyclocross has as well, because you never know in the end who is going to win, and today definitely it was not really sure. I think Van Empel was at certain parts a little bit stronger. Pieterse was technically a little bit better, and in the end I think the stronger woman has won, but Pieterse definitely had a very good performance today.
I think they were just very evenly matched today. I mean, there was not a lot between them in my opinion. I think Pieterse, of course, she had the advantage over the barriers. Van Empel looked to be a bit stronger in the corners. Pieterse had some corners where she was stronger. There were a couple of corners where Van Empel was stronger. And it was just great to see. You knew that this was coming for a long while, a battle between these two riders. And you knew in the race that it would go down to the last lap and probably a sprint, seeing how close they were. I've seen a couple of people suggest that Pieterse should have waited before launching the sprint and not go directly over Van Empel when Van Empel hesitated to launch. What do you guys think about that? Should Pieterse have waited?
I think Van Empel seems to be the stronger sprinter, so logically it seemed like a good idea to try and get the kick early and catch her off guard, do I say? So yeah, I'm not sure if she could have played it differently. I'm sure she'll probably be thinking that this evening. But yeah, I think I'd say she made the right call to try and go long and go early if she knew her sprint wasn't quite up to the same power as Van Empel's.
Yeah, Van Empel has a crazy sprint. It's one of the best in the peloton, but we've hardly seen Van Empel sprint, or at least need to use that kick. But it's insane. I've seen it a number of other times. Also when I was still racing against Van Empel in the youth categories. Van Empel then wasn't as good as she is now, also not in terms of relative levels. Pieterse was always at the front, she also raced in my category. Van Empel, however, was usually a bit in the middle of the pack, where I was. But then already you could see that if there was a sprint for whatever position, if it was 18th, 20th, 10th, it didn't matter for Van Empel. She would launch out of that final corner and sprint for the position, and she was pretty good. She already did a bit of cyclocross in the youth, quite a bit actually, unlike what some people suggest, that she was fully focusing on football until she became first or second year junior. That's not the case. She did combine it with doing football, but that changed a bit. Her priority shifted towards cyclocross, and I would say that was the correct decision. But overall, I mean, it's just stunning. I think that Van Empel played it perfectly. I also think Pieterse did whatever she could. The only difference is for Pieterse, if she would have been in front on the barrier, she could have tried to do more. But Tom, how much did that barriers hop really benefit Puck? Because in the second lap, it looked to me like she opened the gap after the barriers by putting Van Empel under pressure, not necessarily by hopping the barriers.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's more the energy saved, jumping off the bike, running, lifting up the bike. Yeah, it wasn't so heavy with mud today, but it all adds to the weight. It really kind of puts your heart rate up 5 or 10 beats per minute. So just staying on the bike, staying calm, composed, and then being able to kick out of the hurdles or the barriers, not worrying about clipping back in again. And yeah, this is the point where you can actually really capitalize and gain that advantage on your opponents.
Yeah, I think in general it was a parcours where it was just hard to make a difference in general. What do we think about the parcours? I will give my opinion after you guys have done so.
It was quite good. It had some elevation in it. It was not all the time shown quite well on the broadcast. I think they could have done a better job on that, but it was not a bad parkour. It was quite good. Some elevation in it. I think the double bridge, you have said it, during the race where you were discussing it. You said that was not really your favorite point, and I think I felt the same about that. But overall, I think the parkour was quite good, and I enjoyed it. It was entertaining. I think with a little bit of rain, you would have seen a completely different race, and that makes this race also, this is a parkour that I hope that we can see a couple more times coming up in the coming years in the World Cup.
For sure, I would agree with you on that one. I think the setting as well, spectacular in the grounds of the Chateau. And yeah, again, a race outside of Belgium, outside of Netherlands. I'd be certainly keen to see the calendar returning to France again.
I mean, that last part is for me the most important part about the race. It's a race outside of Belgium, and I'm happy to see this. I am not the biggest fan of the parkour. It's harder than it looks on TV, but it's not super spectacular. The scenery is stunning, and I mean, if this race was in Belgium, I would say there's no need for a race like this. And that is because in Belgium there are quite a lot of races like this. It kind of reminded me of in some aspects of Hamme. It reminds me a bit of Kruibeke. Also, some parts of it reminded me a bit of Meulenbeke. A couple of ATS Cross series. And I think it's not the most spectacular parkour, but it's also not the worst parkour in the World Cup. So yeah, because it's in France, I would say I'm happy that it's here. It should be here to stay because the scenery is beautiful. Parkour is just good. I think there were a couple of violation of rules. For instance, that arch where they rode underneath just before the finish wasn't 3 meters wide and had stones sticking out, which wasn't ideal. But besides that, I think it's an okay parkour, and it provided us with some good racing in the women's category. Van Empel and Pieterse fought it out for the win. But let's focus a bit about the rider behind that. Catablanca Vash ending third. It's not the same Vash, in my opinion, as we've seen earlier this season. Earlier this season, she could come close to Brandt and Betsema. Now she is behind Van Empel and Pieterse. It's not great, also not too worrying because I don't think the parkour suits her. But what do you guys think about the ride of Vash?
I think that the race of Vash was not really out of line with the races that she had before. In the end, a solid performance, was a bit yo-yo with the women in front, but in the end she was just not really able to get closer to them. Result-wise, I think she should be happy with what she achieved today. It was a really good result overall, and something to build on going into the Worlds. I think that obviously the ones that were now in front are going to fight it out under 23 category. So for her, she needs to focus on Brandt and Betsema, Alvarado, Vorst, the ones that haven't been participating today. So it's a bit hard to put it in place compared to them. But I think overall it was quite a good result.
Let's look at our entire top 10 then. 3 riders that are actually in the under 23 category on the podium: Van Empel, Pieterse and Vasch. Looking at the rest of the top 10, we find Inger van der Heijden in 4th, ahead of Sylvia Persico. 6th place, I must say, went to Clausel, ahead of Manon Bakker, who did end 7th. 8th place to Eva Lechner, ahead of Marion Norberg Ribeiro. And 10th place goes to Alicia Frank. Out of these names, not a lot that stand out, except one in my opinion. Very solid performance by Sylvia Persico, who ends 5th. She became Italian champion last year. We mentioned it earlier that this was really her breakout season, and she continues her breakthrough season by ending 5th here. I think that she did a very good job, eventually just short of 4th place, but definitely a solid ride by her as well.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's her best World Cup performance of the year. She's kind of been hovering in and around the top 10, but it's been great to see another Italian up there, following the likes of Lechner over the past few years. And yeah, anyone who can potentially challenge the Dutch domination is always good for the sport, I think. But yeah, still a minute and a half down on Van Empel today. But yeah, she was not far off the podium.
I think overall, for us also in general, it's hard to comment about these riders outside of the top 3. I mean, today the directing was pretty poor in my opinion. For once, we did actually get to see more of the riders who weren't fighting for the front 3 places, but they did it at the wrong moment. Like, at some point you could see that Van Empel was defending from Pieterse, but instead of cutting to the next camera shot of the corner where Pieterse was trying to make a move, we went to the battle for 4th and 5th. And we usually only saw them on the finish line. So for us, it's always hard to comment about the riders who are further down in the top 10 unless we are at the race. But overall, I think that for Persico, the bits that I saw and what I know her from is just a good technique. I rewatched the Italian Championships. That was a pretty technical course. She did a great dismount there with some great cornering, throwing her bike through the corner there as well. Really great to see there. And I think today on this technical course, she found a course that suited her. Of course, it's hard to tell how she went through the corners today, but judging by from what I saw, I think that really made the difference for her. And she beats her countrywoman Eva Lechner. Our Sophie wasn't here today, but I think that's basically all there is to say about the riders in the top 10, unless any of you still has a name you would like to discuss, maybe Issam or Tom.
Yeah, I think Foucault, just being short of top 10, only getting 11th. Alicia Frank in the last part of the race was able to overtake her for 10th place. But, I mean, the way she's going through the corners is not the most efficient way. She loses a lot of time there. And I think if she can improve on her cornering, she would definitely have been a little bit higher up in the top 10. I think for sure with Alicia Frank, she would have been ahead of her. And maybe even a couple more places, but that is, definitely something she can work on for the next couple of races and the seasons that are coming up. But, for her, I think also her focus lies a little bit more on the road, riding for Arkea Samsic, the women's team. So, that's obviously something that also might play a role.
Completely forgot to mention it so far. Betsema wasn't here today. She gave forfeit just, I think, 2 days before the race because she preferred training. And that makes Lucinda Brandt the winner of the overall World Cup on the women's side. The men's side was already won by Eli Iserbyt. But today there were more categories that were rounded up in terms of the World Cup, because the World Cup in Hoge Heide got cancelled for youth categories. We had a men's under 23 category with everything still to play for. It was Hendricks who led Ronhaar by 2 points, so it was basically going to be head-to-head. Whoever of these two riders came ahead would win. And we had a close race where it went back and forward for quite a while. Eventually it was Emile Verstringen taking the win, just in front of Ryan Kamp. And late drama, because Ronhaar looked to secure the overall win, but got overtaken on the final part of the race by Mees Hendricks. So that makes Hendricks the winner of the World Cup. Fun news about this: This week on Wednesday, we are having a podcast coming up with Hendricks and Ronhaar in anticipation of the World Championships in Fayetteville at the end of the month. So if you want to hear about these two favorites for the World Championships, make sure to tune in. Of course, there was also junior racing. The men's juniors race was won by David Haverdings, more than 1 minute ahead of Luca Lesseur and Luca Paletti. No Belgians here and no Brits here at the start. And the women's junior category, no Zoe Buxted. She tested positive for COVID before the national championships and was still recovering. Leonie Benveld eventually took it at the final part of the race as well, just ahead of Valentina Corvi. And that meant, because Benveld eventually took the upper hand over Corvi, it meant that Benveld wins the World Cup for junior women, and Valentina Corvi ended second in the race ahead of Katerina Hladikova. Forgot to mention just now, but Haverdings had already secured the men's World Cup standings. And if you want to hear more about Haverdings, make sure to tune into our podcast with him. It's the podcast before this episode. Tom and Issam, thank you for joining me today to talk about this World Cup.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thank you for hosting.
This week we will be back with more news because we are, as said, releasing a podcast with Ronhaar and Hendricks. At the end of the week, we're also releasing a podcast with Puk Pieterse, the runner-up of today's race. If you want to hear more about that, make sure to tune in. Share this podcast with Cyclocross friends, leave a rating. Any questions or comments can be sent to the mail address that's in the description or fill in a contact form on our website, cyclocross.social. And we will see you guys very soon again then. Goodbye!